Today, I'm Carly Colath-Wells, and I'm even more excited about our newsletter that's launching on Monday. We're going to be covering New Orleans. My writing partner, Chelsea Braystead, is writing already about all the exciting places you can get crawfish and all the fun things you need to know. So you can sign up. There's a touch screen in the back. You can also sign up at axios.com/newsletters/local. We're going to continue on with our next guest. He is the newly elected commissioner for District 3 of the Louisiana Public Service Commission. Please welcome to the stage Commissioner Davante Lewis.
Thank you.
Commissioner, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So, Louisiana, we are in a we're in a transition right now.
Right.
Moving from oil and gas, where we have been for many years, looking toward green energy, clean energy, alternative energy sources. What do you think are some of the opportunities that we have in Louisiana in this sector?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the opportunities that Louisiana really has is how our solar community is booming. I mean, when we think about projects in the queue, solar is really an opportunity where Louisiana can lead. We are seeing some of the migration from Texas as some of their policies and rules change. That is really bringing investments here to the state. And so when we think about diversifying our grid, it's not just about renewable energy for the sake of renewable energy. This is economic opportunity for communities that have been left behind for so long. And so I'm really ecstatic about where we're seeing solar going, the possibilities of offshore wind as that technology is developing and the price is coming down, and ways that we can incorporate other things that we know work, like battery storage, which I think is going to be very important when we talk about communities who are in hurricane and disaster-prone areas. And so I think this is an exciting moment. I think we're in an evolution and a revolution right now, and we'll see where we go over the next 10 years.
So what do you think are some of the challenges as we transition, especially in communities of color?
Yeah, I mean, I think first one of the biggest challenges is that we have to talk about logistics of how people's lives work and make sure that, as we move towards renewable energy, that it is affordable. Because one of the things we do not want to do is make the same communities that we say have been harmed by emission standards and by our dependence on fossil fuel now are having even higher bills because renewable energy is not affordable. One of the examples that I use about when I say that we have to match our green future with the logistics of life is, let's talk about electrification. For example, in the city of New Orleans, if you are trying to access all of the available jobs by a car, you can do it with you can access 96% of all the jobs in New Orleans by a car. If you are relying on RTA, public transportation, you can only access 7% of all the jobs in 30 minutes. And so when I talk about that, it's one thing to say, let's change RTA's fleet to electric buses. But if we are not actually working with government to make RTA more available to communities to access it and to do the things that they do in their life, that switch to electrification is not saving us anything. And so we have to be very concerned about making sure that we're centering people in the transition, and that's why I always talk about a just transition. Not just a transition for transition's sake, but how do we do it justly so that low-income communities, black and brown communities, are not left behind, are not saddled with more debt because of that.
So what are some solutions for that? I mean, it costs money to put in solar farms, it costs money to buy new buses. How do we move forward without having the ratepayers and the customers pick up the bill?
Right. I mean, I think we are seeing significant investments that the federal government has made in the Inflation Reduction Act. And we're going to have to be very diligent in working with local governments to apply for funding that talks about hardening the grid, that talks about battery storage, that talks about microgrids, that talks about rooftop solar. Community solar, I think, is one of the most important things when we talk about here in Louisiana. We have a significant amount of the population that doesn't own their home. And so we need to be incentivizing apartment complexes and also landlords to invest in solar because of the reduction. But I think some of the other places that we have to talk significantly about is energy efficiency and weatherization. One of the biggest reasons Louisianians see such high bills is not because of the rate of energy. Our rate of energy in Louisiana is relatively low. But it's what we call the energy burden, the energy cost. And that's because it takes, as you know, it's hotter here in the summer. It's sometimes cooler here in the winter. And because homes are not weatherized correctly, they're not insulated well, it is costing people more and more to keep their homes cool or keep their homes warm. And so we have to be using all of these money and then also looking for state investment to ensure that we are doing everything we can to keep people's energy low. Because we know, for me, as a regulator, I always say that I believe utilities is a human right. And that's a very different metric than I think we've applied to it before, but it gives us a new vantage point of what we're doing.
So with the weatherization efforts that you talked about, are these things that I could be doing at my apartment, my house? What are things that I can do to get my rates down that don't rely on regulation?
Absolutely. I mean, I think one of the things that we don't talk about enough is how much installation matters. So making sure that you are going up in your roof and checking to make sure that the installation is still good on a timely basis really reduces your energy usage. You can also talk about the switching of light bulbs, LED light bulbs. I was at visiting a smart home in Houston a few weeks ago, and a regular light bulb, when we put the thermostat on, was about 186 degrees. That LED light was about 73. So when you're thinking about the lighting that you're using in your home, if your home and your windows are not insulated correctly, or there's those cracks, and you have these very high usage light bulbs, that means there's more energy you got to use. And so we are working at the commission to improve our energy efficiency rules, working with the utility companies to put harder rules for energy efficiency. But I think those are places where people can step up and just make sure that we're catching issues with your AC unit before they become significant problems.
So we're about to be in the dreaded hurricane season. It's quickly approaching, and I'm trying to ignore it.
I know.
What are again, some challenges and opportunities that you see for South Louisiana, for communities of color, as we look toward our grid that has been questionable for previous storms? And fingers crossed we don't get any more big storms this year.
Right. I mean, I think we can't deny the reality of climate change. And we know because of coastal erosion and the warming of the Gulf of Mexico, that means our storms are stronger, and they're going to likely now be stronger as they hit impacted communities. I mean, we can look at Hurricane Ida, which was still a hurricane by the time it got up to Shreveport. I don't think we would have talked about that 10 years ago, for example. I think where I am the most concerned is that we know we are the second poorest state in the nation. And we have, for some odd reason, adopted this ability that our message during hurricane season should be get a game plan. And I think about the constituents I represent in St. James Parish or St. John Parish, where they can't afford to get a game plan. They don't have a choice. They can't jump in a car and decide, I'm just going to go to Dallas for an unperiod amount of time. Their home becomes the safe haven because it's the only choice that they have. And so we have to start looking at ways that we are building, I think, community solar. I think the project that we are seeing developing in New Orleans with Together Louisiana on creating community solar hubs is an avenue to go. But it's also about building a resilient, reliable system. And we need to look at our other states. The state of Florida, when Hurricane Ian hit last year, not a single transmission line fell. And that's because they started looking at moving from wooden poles to steel poles. They started talking about burying transmission lines underground. And I think we have to have a real conversation in Louisiana about the future of the resiliency of our infrastructure and utilities. Otherwise, we are going to create catastrophic danger. And for me, as I said, it's a human right. That's life or death. People die more in storms, not from the storm, but from generators because they're trying to keep their medicine cool, they're trying to keep their family safe, or they're trying not to die from the extraordinary heat. And so if we are not looking at this as a life or death issue for people, then we're not doing it right.
So the neighborhood hubs that you were talking about, so that would be like Queen Trini's restaurant where she has got solar powered batteries set up. It's a wonderful restaurant in New Orleans where when the power goes out, you can go, you can charge your phone. She's got cold water, she's got power there. So is that where you think we're moving when it comes to surviving in storms when you don't have, I mean, it's a privilege to evacuate when a storm is coming.
Yeah,
I mean, you have to be able to get off work, you have to have a vehicle, you have to have money for a hotel. I mean, it is a privilege to leave. It is the safest thing, but it is a privilege to do that. And so we're doing these community bases. We've got, I think there's one now, So is the plan to do more and to spread out and get more businesses involved with that?
Absolutely. We're seeing, as we talked about earlier, in New Orleans, churches stepping up, the Broadmoor Community Church in New Orleans. We are looking at property here in Baton Rouge and Scotlandville as an opportunity to build community solar and invest. But these are also, as you mentioned, battery storage, which means if the power goes off, we're seeing battery become a part of the solution. And we're seeing this not only just across community partners, but industry stepping up, right? I mean, I think right now we are seeing Entergy Louisiana be aggressive in applying not only for battery storage from a DOE grant here in Baton Rouge and North Baton Rouge, but also in New Orleans. And so I think this is a collective fight among us all. No matter what side you stand on, that we know we have to build a system that protects people in Louisiana and our most vulnerable. Because like I said, I think about my constituents, and just to put it in context, we're in Louisiana, we're in Baton Rouge. LSU football is great. We all love what Coach Kelly has done, but I remind people, I represent the communities right around Tiger Stadium. And what Coach Kelly makes in a day, my community members make in a year. And so that is just the level of poverty that is prevalent here in this state. And that's why we have to take into account people in this transition, in this challenge, because if we are not looking at how people survive, how people logistically move around in their lives, these conversations don't really matter. Because like I said, if electrification costs more money, people don't want it. If we are not in making the investments in a utility system that keeps them safe, people don't know what to do. And we have to really center people back in all of these movements.
So with electrification, what do you see as the future for electric vehicles in South Louisiana right now?
I think electrification is a great way to go. I think it is the future. I think we're still waiting for the cost. But I think we have to talk about the logistics, right? One of the things that I've been talking to a lot of people about is I can't go out there in my communities and solely promote moving to electric vehicles when we have not really solved a charging station situation, whether or not utilities own the charging stations or we let private investment do it. And we're not basing those on hurricane evacuation routes. We know EVs are harder to tow. So for me, I think about what happens when I am trying to have constituents get out of Gonzales, Louisiana, for example, and maybe evacuate to Biloxi. They get on the spillway and we have two EVs in the right and left lane that break down or run out of charging. And so for me, it is electrification is the way forward, but electrification cannot move faster than the way that we actually make government work for people. Whether or not we invest in enough community charging stations, is it costly for people to put charging stations in their home? Do they match routes that would equal an evacuation route for our people? And so this is the work with the Department of Transportation and the Office of Energy. This is the work with our state plan. But for me, I at this point cannot go tell communities to go buy an EV, A, because they can't afford it, and B, we have to make sure that it actually works for them.
How long do you think that's going to take? Is there a timeline?
I don't know if there's a timeline. I mean, I think we have to be aggressive. We are starting to see the conversations, but this is where I can't harp on enough that we need to center communities. It's one thing for a bunch of us in government to get around and talk about these issues. It's another thing for us to be asking constituents up and down my 10-parish area, how would this work for you? I mean, it's great that we are seeing in the Inflation Reduction Act the $7,500 credit for an EV, but that means communities have to have that money up front to get the tax credit. So it is how policies sometimes do not match the reality of people. My constituents don't have the money to buy an electric vehicle right now and then wait for a $7,500 credit. So that means we're going to have to re-examine how we actually institute policy to meet our electrification goals.
Commissioner, I wish we had more time, but we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, and we're going to make room for the next speaker.
All righty, thank you.
Thank you.